Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about continuity. Now this isn't canon. If you want to hear me talk about what is canon, what isn't canon, you can go check out a video. I'll have it linked somewhere for you. Continuity is a problem that the Elder Scrolls has had for a long time. That is taking the story from the previous installment and moving it forward in a way that is mostly coherent. And that's what we're lacking in the Elder Scrolls series for the most part, is a coherence of story. And I think mostly it has to do with the fact that the games can be approached in very different ways. I frequently get asked, who is the canon Nerevarine? Who is the canon Dragonborn? So on and so forth, thinking that there is some kind of coherency between the different games, when in fact they very much want to keep away from any kind of concept like that. So going back to the beginning, we've got Elder Scrolls 1: The Arena. You got to choose your race. You got to go on what the storyline would call a 10-year journey to defeat Jaeger Tharn. So whereas most other games in the series take place during 1 year, the first Elder Scrolls game took place over a decade, because the character had to travel to every province of Tamriel, find the dungeon, explore the dungeon, and then finally go to the Imperial City and defeat Jaeger Tharn. And because of the scope and scale of Tamriel, the way it was originally depicted, it took over a month to travel between provinces. It was kind of a big deal, actually. But at the very end of the game, you are proclaimed the Eternal Champion. Now, from a storyline perspective, going into Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, it could be assumed that the Eternal Champion is still hanging around Cyrodiil at this point. There is no mention of the Eternal Champion, but the Agent of the Blades couldn't have been this well-known savior of the Empire. He or she had to be this incognito person who starts a brand new life in the Iliac Bay without drawing too much attention while speaking with the various nobilities in what is essentially a warring states era. Yes, in Elder Scrolls 2, all the nations of the Iliac Bay are fighting each other, with three main alliances. Throw in Orsinium, throw in the Shadow faction of the Underking, and several others, and you have not just a powder keg, but an ongoing war. Now, all the demons we fought in Elder Scrolls 1, they are renamed to Daedra, and the Daggerfall manual explains that Daedra is the proper learned name for demons, and that peasants still call them demons. So that's how we more or less establish the existing Elder Scrolls universe with the existing set of divines and existing set of Daedra in this second game, while still keeping a kind of semi-coherent story. But we can totally see how High Rock and Hammerfell, expressed in Arena, they were huge. The provinces were colossal, far bigger than anything you would see in Morrowind, Oblivion, or Skyrim. However, come Daggerfall, they expanded that to ludicrous proportions, which made the Iliac Bay roughly the size of Great Britain. So we already fail at having continuity within the actual sizes of each province. Each province can be thought of as a representative size. And this is where we get into trouble, because people want to definitively say that this is the canon Skyrim, when, as I said in my previous video, I'm not getting into canon that much, but the canon Skyrim couldn't feed its own people, not as it's set up. And the way cultural drift works, all the cultures in Tamriel would have been assimilated a long time ago, if Skyrim's size were accurate. So what we had to conclude is that Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim are all representative sizes. What that means is the storyline has this vast world of Tamriel, something akin to Daggerfall's size or even larger, where entire armies can exist in true scale, and then the games are small representations of that storyline. Now, I know this leads people to wonder, well, if you're getting into this again, where's that coherency you're talking about? So we've already established there is no continuity in the landmass itself. Rather, details may be shown or omitted in each game as it's relevant to the story that's being told. What about the main character? The main character of Daggerfall. Well, he or she is never heard from again. They're assumed to have died during what is known as the Warp in the West, and any semblance we had of continuity is utterly destroyed at the Warp in the West. For those of you who've never heard of it before, at the end of Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, you had various endings to choose from. Unfortunately, Morrowind's setup relies on all of those endings having taken place. For example, orcs were not considered people by the storyline of Daggerfall. They were considered monsters to be hunted and killed. And only when you got the Orsinium ending, no one can deny Gortrog's claimed orcish equality, were orcs then considered people under the Empire. The Warp in the West made that ending canon alongside of all the other endings. And whilst from a narrative perspective, I would dare say that that makes them sissies, cowardly sissies, from a game developer standpoint, this could be thought of as a gift to the players saying, no, we're not invalidating what you did. We understand you would resent us if we told you that your gameplay wasn't valid. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to say that everyone's gameplay is valid. And that's how Daggerfall became the standard by which Bethesda treats all its endings. That is to say, Daggerfall going into Morrowind. It's very easy to say that the hero of Morrowind, the Nerevarine, was a Dark Elf, as Lord Nerevar was a Dark Elf, as it was the land of the Dark Elves. But you will occasionally have a player who absolutely insists on playing either an Argonian or an orc or a human, and absolutely says, my version of Morrowind is the true one. And damn anyone who says otherwise. So what you'd originally think of as a reasonable assumption that whichever province a game took place in, the race that they suggest you play is the canon one, or is the one that would be taken. Instead, come Oblivion, the next game in the Elder Scrolls series, they decided, nah, we're not going to reference it. But what about the things that are going on in Morrowind? No. We don't want a chance for the player to ever interact or see the Nerevarine, so we're going to send him off on a journey to Akavir in our Radiant Conversations. Well, what about the Hero of Kibosh, the hero from Oblivion? Well, what we're going to do with him is we're going to make him the Mad God, Sheogorath. See, that way we can just say he disappeared. In fact, there's no memory of him at all. He's been entirely replaced by Sheogorath. So we never have to show or reference the 7th champion of Cyrodiil. We never have to say what it is. And that brings us to Skyrim, the latest entry in the main titled Elder Scrolls series. The question everyone has, for me at least, on a frequent basis is the Dragonborn canon Nord? Is he the sword and shield user that goes Fus Roda? Can't he be the mage that doesn't really use shouts except maybe Dragonrend? And I said, honestly, it makes the most sense because Nord was the default race that showed up in Skyrim, Imperial was the default race that showed up in Oblivion, Dunmer was the default race that showed up in Morrowind. But Bethesda will never make a canonical statement about any of these characters. Thus, there is no true continuity from game to game to game. And really, that's what it comes down to. In respecting player choice, they have to water down the continuity as much as possible. Instead of actually having Skyrim being the sequel to Oblivion, instead of Oblivion being the sequel to Morrowind, instead, these are disconnected stories, disjointed, with some references of being in the same world, but for the most part, they make it impossible for the various protagonists' paths to cross. And prior to Skyrim, and its 200-year time skip, all the other games, in the main series took place so close together, it was within the lifetimes of each other. I think possibly Skyrim was an attempt to escape that, but even then, Bethesda's behavior didn't change, because the last Dragonborn became Mirak's servant, either by choice or unwittingly through taking Mirak's place. They have the opportunity to nix him or her from the storyline, to completely remove the Dragonborn as a consideration for the next game. And whilst I, in my response to Violic Puma Gaming, which is more or less just a lore rant on my own part, but I mentioned that you could have the last Dragonborn being instrumental in creating a new empire and making the last Dragonborn the next Tiber Septim, but I don't see that happening. I just see them doing what they've always done, making the main character just fade into obscurity and then telling a new story with a new character. Now, for Elder Scrolls 6, I'm going to say this right now, I'm actually going to repeat something one of my friends told me. They really hoped that World of Warcraft wouldn't be canon when Warcraft 4 came around. It was funny how that Warcraft 4 turned out, right? Sarcasm. As long as an MMO's going, why would you compete with the same IP? It doesn't make sense, and that Blizzard, at least, Blizzard Entertainment, has no intention, as far as we can tell, of going forward with another Warcraft game, despite the fact that Warcraft 3 is one of my favorite games, period. I'm not a huge fan of the online multiplayer, but the campaign was just spectacular. And whilst I personally feel they really are going to make a new Elder Scrolls game in Elder Scrolls 6, I wouldn't be surprised if they delayed it maybe 7 or 8 years until ESO, the Elder Scrolls Online, reached the point of diminishing returns. You see, every MMO reaches a point where the amount of money you put into it yields less and less results. And in Warcraft's case, they've actually gone to smaller expansion models. Now, you'd be surprised, they've actually created a more cinematic storytelling. They've done a lot of tricks in World of Warcraft to streamline the experience, to put less effort to get the same results, which is the resurgence of players every expansion pack. My wife and I are no exception to that. We both play World of Warcraft for about a month after an expansion goes live, and then we promptly quit because we've got other things to do. But cycling it back around, let's assume that an Elder Scrolls 6 is created. I guarantee you that it's going to be so divorced from Skyrim that you won't even know that they're in the same world, other than, of course, the gods, the references, the lore books, you know, the things that make Tamriel Tamriel. But if you weren't given those pieces of flavor, if you were just told this new story without them dropping the word Dunmer or Altmer, for example, you wouldn't be able to know definitively that this takes place after Skyrim. If you just explained the story, I can almost guarantee to you, Last Dragonborn's gone. So you may be wondering at this point, well, how could they have done it differently? Well, let's look at Blizzard Entertainment, the people we just mentioned. But let's go back a moment and actually talk about the Diablo series. In Diablo 1, you got to choose between a warrior, a rogue, and a wizard, more or less. Might have been a sorcerer, whatever. My point is, these three classes got to go into this dungeon, got to go all the way down to this hellish sanctuary where this bastard Lazarus was performing a profane ritual. You killed Lazarus, you opened the portal to hell, you went into hell, and you managed to kill Diablo. And in doing so, in order to seal him away, because he was going to break free of his soul stone, you shove the soul stone into yourself and actually become his new vessel, restraining his power for a time. However, come Diablo 2, they established firm fix that it was the warrior who had become the vessel for Diablo. They didn't pussyfoot around with it. They created a specific canon for it. Now, eventually they would retcon a bunch of stuff in really stupid ways with a novel called The Sin War and so on. But my point here is that they would give that warrior a name, Prince Aiden. Through all the detailed supplementary material, they told his story, they explained the story in detail. And that's something Bethesda simply can't do. Not and respect the open world set of choices. I would dare argue, however, in Oblivion, that the collapse of all the guilds in Cyrodiil is the fault of the main character. Because if the main character became the leader of all those factions, the Archmage of the Mages Guild, the leader of the Fighters Guild, the Grey Fox of the Thieves Guild, Speaker of the Dark Brotherhood, and so on, became all these things all at once, and then became the Mad God Sheogorath disappearing from the world, what happens with all these factions suddenly becoming leaderless at the same time? Well, complete and total anarchy is what happens. And it explains why all these factions aren't around come Skyrim. Well, in reality, all these factions aren't around come Skyrim because the developers just wanted to create their own unique twists on which were the generic fantasy places before. The Mages Guild was generic in a way, but it actually felt like an anchor to the series' roots. The Fighters Guild was generic because fighter was a class in basic Dungeons and Dragons, but again, it's an anchor to the series' roots. And by making them different in Skyrim, they felt like they were making a departure from that, just like with the 200-year time skip. Made it much easier to handle, much easier to digest. However, you see where I'm getting with this. There is a certain amount of continuity you can draw from point A to point B, from Oblivion to Skyrim, in order to say, oh, this did happen this way for a reason. And it's very easy to take these arbitrary, which I consider bad design decisions. No, I seriously think that Skyrim is riddled with stupid ideas and could have been done better. That's my whole What If Skyrim Was Good series. But my point is that even though I can say that they're dumb, you can still draw the point A to point B and explain why it happened. There's still a certain level of continuity in there, even though if you removed the flavor, you wouldn't be able to tell that these games were in the same universe. From the tone to how the story was written, it's completely different. So my question here is, and the whole video, what it built up to, is a very simple question. Would you guys like to see another Elder Scrolls Adventures game? For those of you who don't know, Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard took place in the Second Era, just prior to the Third Era starting. It's when Tiber Septim was sweeping across the lands of Tamriel. You played as a Redguard named Cyrus, a legendary hero attributed to being a manifestation of the Hunding, aka a divine avatar that exists to make way for his people. I would dare say that it's got the best storytelling in the entire Elder Scrolls series. But it is not an open world RPG. There is very little in the way of freedom of choice. It is a very narrative-driven, linear action-adventure game. Now, it played very much like Tomb Raider. I would, of course, argue for modernized controls and, you know, just a better gameplay experience. The question is, would you guys like to, while waiting for another main titled Elder Scrolls game, because it may be some time, would you want to see another Elder Scrolls Adventures game? Perhaps an Elder Scrolls Adventures game taking place in Cyrodiil during the Great War. If you've ever played the card game Elder Scrolls Legends, you do go through a storyline that's supposed to take place during the Great War. Imagine if you actually had that in a third-person action-adventure game with hack-and-slash elements. I don't know, it could be pretty good. If you threw some RPG elements in there, gave us some freedom of choice in certain situations, I would consider it a damn good win for the franchise. The problem is, again, anything you set in the past, you have to make sure it jives with the future. It comes with its own unique set of challenges, otherwise you have an Elder Scrolls Online, where the development team thinks of the previous games in the series as fanciful tales, and what they're giving you in ESO is the real world of Tamriel. You either take the very careful, meticulous archivist point of view, or you do Elder Scrolls Online, do the sledgehammer approach. Either one would do. I'd prefer the more meticulous way, but what do you guys think? Leave a comment below. I want to hear where you think possibly an Elder Scrolls Adventures game would be good. I've advocated Black Marsh earlier, but maybe there's something I haven't thought of yet, where an Elder Scrolls Adventures action-adventure game would go well. Who knows, I might even steal your idea and make a video about it. Either way, thank you all for watching. Check the links on screen for more content. And if you're bored, check out my live streams at twitch.tv/Dovahkiin. Y'all have a good one now.